Hello, this is Garnet Dupuis, and I'm coming by video to you from Chiang Mai, Thailand. I'm here in the offices of Recharge. Christian Barman and his team have been really kind to set this up. Zulia and all of your team, this is for you. Dr. Zulia Frost is a longtime colleague and dear friend, as is Dr. Kim Yops. I'm told that Zulia comes first, Kim comes third. I'm number two. Here we go. I'm going to try to cover a topic that is actually worthy of a two-day conference itself. Here's 30 minutes. I think I'll shoot for maybe 3 10-minute segments. The topic is adaptive regulation in complex systems. It's probably one of the most central theories that anybody working in natural health care needs to appreciate. I'm also offering a paper. I hope that Zulia will distribute to all you members. You can read it at length. It's around about 17 pages. I'm going to hit a few of the high points. First of all, to make it more simple, I hope, I'm going to tell you a story. The story of a woman with a stone in her shoe. Here we go. There was once a woman. She was walking, and when walking, yes, a stone got in her shoe. At first, it was so painful. And she stopped. She couldn't walk. Oh my God. Bit by bit, the stone began to shift and move. And she found that after a while, the ultimate acute pain had decreased to a kind of adequate level of pain. The stone was moving around and it found a place, so she continued to walk. But now, however, with a limp. The stone stayed in her shoe. I know it's a bit of a stretch on the story, but you get the point. It's an analogy. So she continued her life with this stone in her shoe that had shifted to a point where it was like adequately tolerable to continue. However, she stopped taking long walks. She chose a car. She changed a hobby to one that was more sedentary. And perhaps she even chose a partner that was willing to accept her limitations and the way that she had kind of managed the problem. And life went on. This is something we'll look at a little bit more later, what that stone in the shoe is. It's a kind of an adequate adaptation. So let's reconfigure the story where she's taking the walk. A stone is in the shoe. It's painful. She can't continue. And instead of just moving it around to a kind of an adequate position, she actually chose to resolve it entirely. So there's no more stone in her shoe. She continues walking. And as you imagine, she loves taking treks and hikes. She doesn't need to use the car all the time. She chooses a hobby that is not inhibited, and maybe even, to stretch the story, chose a partner in life that was willing to be with her in the full expression of her life. So, keeping this in mind, the idea is that we experience insults, we experience challenges, we get hurt, we get ill, and are we willing to accept just an adequate degree of resolution, or do we seek full resolution? Are we willing to carry with us a great degree of unfinished business? Problems that have been resolved just to an adequate level. This is the point that is really at the heart of adaptive regulation in complex systems, meaning keeping you and me healthy throughout the course of our life. What I'm going to be doing in the next 2, maybe 3 short segments is to try to hit a few of the high points, a deeper point of theory, but I want you to always reflect back on to the woman with the stone in her shoe, because perhaps you, I, others that you know, are walking around with a stone in their shoe. Who knows? Maybe even more than one. So the next segment is going to be looking at efficiency, self-preservation, self-regulation. Don't forget the shoe. Thanks. Okay, so let's get into something a little bit more technical. Remember the story of the woman with the stone in her shoe. There are 3 basic words that I'd like you to think about right now. You can refer to these back in your document a little later if you like. It's going to be self-preservation, self-regulation, and efficiency. Efficiency. The efficiency means how well the system is looking after itself. This is one of the main points of a complex system, meaning like our body. The idea is that there really is no boss. The body as a whole is looking after itself. That's the nature of a complex adaptive system. Now, to have that, you've got to have communication. Communication between all the elements in the system. And we can call that the efficiency. How efficient is it going? You know, if you think about an air conditioning system, or you think about the engine in your car and fuel economy, there's a lot of efficiency issues going on. And I can tell you right now, in neuroadaptive therapy, and there are different forms of it, of course, Interx and the recharge flex beams and power beams, they're all in this class. This idea of creating the most efficient self-regulation as possible is the goal of a neuroadaptive therapy. This is your goal. Now, you've got to understand that the relationship between self-preservation and self-regulation is incredibly intimate. Obviously, at the most basic level, if you don't survive, what's the point of attempting self-regulation? So, when things come along and they threaten, this is really important to understand, when things come along that are a threat, an injury, a strong illness, even a strong emotional shock, that the system moves away from general self-regulation to a very focused self-preservation. The idea is the system wants to survive. Now, if before that challenge you're running at a high level of self-regulation, you have a lot of efficiency in your system, meaning you're taking care of yourself. Maybe you're lucky, you have good genetics, you're following a lifestyle that is conducive. That higher level of efficiency means you're much more likely to survive the insult. Your self-preservation is going to be more successful. So if you want to survive the tough stuff, do your best to get yourself in a good position before. Now, self-preservation takes all the resources and focuses them into a point. Okay, another example. I like analogies. Imagine that you have a family and you've got 5 kids. And you're regulating all of the behaviors, all of the care for all of the kids. Suddenly, one of the kids has a big problem. I don't know what it is. They fall down, they hurt themselves, I don't know. But what happens is, not because of a lack of love, your attention leaves the other 4 children and focuses in on that one child experiencing a threat to their survival. That's short term. So what you're going to do, and I'm going to sneak this in because this is a key point in developing what we'll call here unfinished business. Okay? There's the child. You forget the other 4. Maybe forget is too strong. Your attention goes to the one, and what you're going to do is you're going to solve, this is really important, you're going to solve the crisis to an adequate level of resolution. Adequate, meaning the kid is out of danger. Why? Because you can't leave the other 4 entirely. Maybe you're at the beach, right? And one of them almost drowns. Well, you pull them out of the water, you make sure they're okay. I mean, hopefully you don't do, CPR or something, but they're okay now. So they might be upset, they may be crying, maybe they've got an upset stomach. You would like to resolve that completely, but the other 4 kids are running around on the beach in the surf. So as long as the number 1 child is adequately cared for, as long as self-preservation has been achieved adequately, then you back up and you make sure the other 4 kids are fine. You return to self-regulation. Now, maybe that kid, when you get home, is going to have some lingering issues, some lingering complaints. But they're not complaining in an obvious way. Maybe they're really upset emotionally. Maybe they swallowed some bacteria and it's not really evident yet that they've got an infection from the water. But you don't know that yet. Why? Because it's been adequately resolved as a threat to survival. Self-preservation oftentimes resolves itself in a way that is positive, but long-term can be negative. For example, you burn your hand. Scarring is really important. Inflammation is really important at that early stage. However, if you don't really attend to it completely, what can happen is a long-term chronic inflammation, and maybe the scars bind the fingers together so you lose mobility. It's not that the inflammation and the scarring were bad, it's just that unless you're really attentive, insults can be resolved only at an adequate level. And what does that mean? You can build up a lot of unfinished business in your body. Things that come to the front burner of the stove get pushed to the back burner. They're not off the stove. So what we'll look at next in this short segment is more of this idea of how to deal with unfinished business. Thanks. All right, let's continue. I'd like to remind you of something, that there is a document that I've supplied to Zulia, and I expect that she'll give every one of you a copy. The document is about 17 pages long. These are a few of the key points in these short segments, about a half an hour total. So if it seems that something's not quite clear or you need more context, go back, have a look at the paper, and I think it'll help you a lot. And of course, Dr. Frost is well able to help you along with it. Okay, so we were talking about self-preservation. We were talking about self-regulation and efficiency. And what came up was this story about the kids at the beach, the unfinished business. When you think about the approach in theory and therapy of neuroadaptive therapy, it has two main goals. One is, if there is what we'll call an acute incident, what you want to do is assist that acute incident through the stages of self-preservation to a fully adequate, not limited adequate, but a fully adequate resolution, meaning that the system returns to full self-regulation without accumulating unfinished business. So that's one of the first goals, is in neuroadaptive therapies, using any number of devices, most certainly the Interex, most certainly great technologies, new technologies like FlexBeam and PowerBeam, that what you're looking at is an opportunity to introduce guiding effects so that those short-term emergency reactions of survival are fully accomplished, and accomplished to a degree so that there's a safe and uncomplicated return to self-regulation. That's number one. Number two, and unfortunately, commonly, a person will present with the strange, sometimes difficult to understand expression in symptoms, certain kinds of complaints that aren't immediately linked to a recent acute event. What is this? This is the pot being stirred by the unfinished business. So anybody working with neuroadaptive therapies and theories are going to account for these two different elements. Now, I think the ACUTE has a pretty clear set of therapies, assuming the person is willing to continue in the therapy to full resolution. Some are happy at adequate, meaning it's not bothering me. Remember the woman with the stone in her shoe? It was not as painful as before. The stone shifted, so she felt okay to be limited. She felt okay to have a limp. She felt okay to ride instead of walk, and so on and so on. Maybe it's just circumstance. Remember the family with the 5 kids. You're not a bad parent because you return to the other 4. Circumstances sometimes demand it. You've got to go back to work, whatever. So the thing about unfinished business is that as it can accumulate, this in many ways could be what we think of as aging. Maybe the chronology of aging and the biology of aging aren't exactly the same thing. For many of us, what we think is aging limitations is actually the slow and somewhat complicated accumulation of unfinished business, insults that have been resolved only adequately for preservation but not returned to full self-regulation. So keep in mind that unfinished business, adequately resolved insults, are always consuming resources, what we'll call energy, which is a popular term. It's a little bit abused, I would say, but what I call resources, information, energy, matter, nutrients, all these kinds of things, that unfinished business, you can imagine them to be things locked away in the back room of your house. You don't go there often, except when you open the door, you go, oh. So there is an expense to unfinished business. And this is one of the profound understandings to have, that for many persons that feel fatigued, some kind of lower level of vitality, they say, oh, I need more energy, to use a popular term. The fact is that many systems, many people are full of vital energy, but much of it is being diverted into sustaining these loads of unfinished business, these adequately but not completely resolved challenges. The person that has the lingering chest problem, the person that has certain kinds of circulatory limitations, disturbed sleep, all these kinds of things are indications that the efficiency of self-regulation is being reduced because of unfinished business. This is a great indicator of the fact that a person can be without overt symptoms. They don't seem to be sick, except bit by bit, what we'll call that creative appetite is being reduced. They have enough, gas in the tank. I keep on returning to the word energy because it's common, but it's too limited of a concept. Because you can have a lot of gas in the tank of your car, but if your engine isn't running well, you can't get the acceleration that you want. You can push on the accelerator all you want, and all you may get is more turbulence in the engine. So this efficiency issue, the person has enough energy to get up. They have enough resource or vitality to go to work. They pick up some food on the way home because they don't feel like cooking. They get home, they eat, and they just want to crash. So they're functioning, but that vital buffer of creative energy is being reduced. Why? Because the resources are being consumed in accumulation with keeping, I was going to say keeping all their shit together, but I shouldn't say shit. Keeping all the unfinished business on the back burner. At a certain point, if unfinished business is accumulating, the system is going to reach out to the world in an effort to save itself. And that process of reaching out to the world, we usually call symptoms. So in the next short segment, let's talk about what happens when symptoms appear from problems that seem old. That's the unfinished business wanting to clear the table, clear the desk, and retrieve some of its vitality. Okay, so back up a little bit. Think about, perhaps as a therapist, as a practitioner, as a doctor, whomever, that you're going to be meeting these two categories of people. Acute insults that you want to work through further than just adequate. You want to resolve it as much as possible. It may take a bit of time into complete resolution. So what? The level of self-regulation stays at a high level of efficiency. Those are the ones that make you look great because part of what's on your side is well-managed time. The other person, patient, client, whatever, that can come is that person that is dealing with the uncomfortable, sometimes unclear expressions of unfinished business. And that's where the therapy becomes deep and insightful, and that's where the person needs to be coached into appreciating that what they're doing is they're finishing, or they have a chance to finish, unfinished business. Thanks. I'm hoping this, for this point, will be the last short segment, understanding that the topic is quite significant, if not profound, and I think also, like myself, most of us will spend the rest of our lives better appreciating, studying, and discovering the implications of all these theories and therapies for the practical use in caring for ourselves and our patients. We talked about unfinished business. We talked about acute issues. Let's leave the acute aside and try to wrap this up with a little bit of advice or appreciation of the evolution of unfinished business in terms of therapy, actual applications. I had mentioned to you that unfinished business will certainly accumulate if it's not cared for. And at a certain level, depending on the person's age and genetics and general lifestyle, they're able to tolerate a certain amount of unfinished business. This is one of the ironies of vitality, that there are people that start off with a lot of gas in their tank. They have the genetics, they have a good lifestyle. Interestingly, if they're not careful, they can be accumulating great loads of unfinished business and think everything is fine until one day it isn't. That's why, in a way, the person that has the more sensitive constitution may have a certain advantage because they're given messages much earlier in their life that they can't tolerate that stuff, right? That adequate is not enough for them, that they need resolution. So keep in mind that the overtly healthy person that hasn't got a care or claim in their life may suddenly hit a wall one day because they've been able to tolerate a lot of unfinished business and quote unquote get away with it. So at a certain point, a system will shift from a kind of forgiving self-regulation with a lot of compromised unfinished business to say, hey, this is too much. Self-preservation asserts itself again. I want to survive, and I can't guarantee my survival if I'm allowing all of these compromised, energy, resource-sucking, unfinished business processes to continue. Maybe the digestion is off, the bowels are off, the sleep is off. I mean, it's all going off, and So at that point, the system will seek out help. And this is where the symptom is, to not be maybe too dramatic, it is the cry for help. If it's not the cry for help, it's certainly the guide for help. Now, for those of you that have a background in some of the Russian-based early principles, and of course Dr. Frost is deeply aware and educated, oftentimes in neuroadaptive therapies, attention is given to the cardinal expression, what's usually called the POP, the POP, the point of pain. If the person can point, that is a pivot point, that's a starting point, it's a reference point, because it isn't just happenstance. You can think of the mechanics of why the symptom is there, but why is that symptom expressing like that? That is the self-regulation wanting to support the self-preservation. When the symptoms come forward, that's a huge advantage because it is the system voicing, expressing an interest in a new dynamic. Help me here. I can't tolerate this. So when it comes down to symptoms expressing, there are basically two different ways of approaching it, depending on how ready and willing and able the system is to communicate with you. If it's communicating at a reasonable level, then, and I'm choosing a little bit of a technical term here, then you're able to interface with the system and follow a vector. The vector is where the system leads you, guides you in a way of helping the system. So this vector, and of course there are different techniques, different measurement techniques and different styles of finding out from the body itself how to help the body, that you follow this vector, which is methodical, and there's more than one method. Earlier techniques are quite complex, later techniques are more simplified. Sometimes it's time management, sometimes it's a deeper insight. I'm not claiming any one particular method, but there are methods that follow a vector. Now, sometimes the body is saying, help me please, but the body itself is not clear. The efficiency of self-regulation is kind of low. So oddly, what you do is you come into the system and you create some chaos. Chaos may sound bad, but what it is you're increasing the range of possible or probable vectors. In a case where a system sometimes gets fixed or fixated, kind of stubborn, or maybe confused, it wants to adapt. It wants to go past adequate. The unfinished business is becoming a labor, too much of an expense. The system is expressing but not clearly. So what you do is you go in and you interface with the system by helping it destabilize. Destable sounds bad, but destable is also when resources can be allocated in new and different ways. Stable sounds good, but too stable is stuck. And you know that there are those of us, look at yourself, look at myself, that can be so-called stuck in bad habits. And you don't know the way out. So sometimes you've got to just shuffle the deck. Sometimes you've got to kind of, give it a kick in the butt and toss it up in the air, and then you start to see, as the dust settles, where the system feels and wants to go. So we have these two approaches to interface with a person. When the system itself says, hey, I can't tolerate the unfinished business, let's move some of this from the back burner to the front burner. Let's resolve this once and for all. Efficiency. You've got to think in terms of how efficient is the system. If the demands of the therapy exceed the efficiency of the system, it's not going to work well. One of the cardinal elements that is at the heart of neuroadaptive theory is you don't force it. You follow it. Don't force it, follow it. The system is much more wise than any kind of therapist. Consult the body, consult the system, see how you may be surprised at how it seeks to resolve what you think is a stomach problem, and all of a sudden you're working up in the neurology of the neck. So the system is highly complex. The last point that I'd like to leave you with is, if a system is showing a lower level of efficiency, meaning it's not integrating stimulation at a very high level, be careful to not think that just by dumping stimulation on it is going to be the way to get the best result. You think, well, it's just low vitality. If we just give it a punch, it's going to be better. No, the fact is that if you press the accelerator, maybe there's a loose tie rod in the steering of the car. And the reason that it doesn't steer well is not because you're not giving it enough acceleration. It's because you have to, in this case, tighten up the tie rods. By the way, this car example is for Christian because he loves them, right? So consider efficiency. Look at self-preservation, self-regulation. Look at an acute condition where you want to take it to complete resolution. Remember the kid at the beach and the other kids? Or when unfinished business is accumulated and is reaching out for help, we'll call those the symptoms. Neuroadaptive therapy and theory is a huge subject. It has a lot of nuance, a lot to discover, and I hope that you continue on your own path. Take care. Thank you.